Very good evening to you all joining us on the meeting this evening. My name's Cath Smith, I'm the chair of Hyddig Cymru, and it's my absolute pleasure to chair this afternoon's proceedings, or this evening's proceedings. This is actually the third in a series of farmer forums which are being held by HCC across Wales. The first two sessions were actually held in Glenfern College and Pencoed College in recent weeks, and those sessions were actually combined with additional workshops for college students to help shape and inform their knowledge of the work of HCC across Wales on behalf of the red meat industry. The overarching purpose of these forums and the meeting tonight is to inform and engage with you as our levy payers and give you the opportunity to hear about HCC's latest work, and for you to be able to ask questions and share constructive views and ideas on both the challenges and the opportunities that are facing the red meat sector here in Wales. I'm putting you on notice now to get your thinking caps on because there is the opportunity to ask questions throughout this evening's proceedings. So if you do want to pose a question, there's a Q&A function that you should all be able to see. If you're joining through a mobile device and you can't see the Q&A function, if I can ask you to seek out 3 dots on your screen and click there, and you should be able to then discover and ask any questions that you wish to. In terms of formality, we are recording this evening's proceedings so that we can put this online and share it in a wider forum after the session. So we are recording this session. And in terms of the Q&A, you can ask any questions you want whenever you want to, but we are going to save them all up for a Q&A with the panel at the end of the meeting, which is a perfect segue into me introducing you to the wider panel that we've got this evening. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by 3 hugely valued and hardworking members of the HCC executive team, Elizabeth Songcoat, Pip Gill, and Rachel Madeley-Davis. And the 3 of them are going to share with you some fantastic presentations and industry updates around markets, industry development, marketing campaigns and market development work both at home and abroad, and HCC's work in the sphere of sustainability. So without further ado, first up in terms of presentations, we have Elizabeth Songcoat. Elizabeth is the Senior Market Intelligence and Research and Development Officer for HCC. She works in the Future Sustainability and Future Policy Department, but also works closely with our colleagues across the Supply Chain Delivery team. And she's going to give a market update to you all. So Elizabeth, I'm going to hand the reins to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Kath. I'll just share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. Good evening, everyone. This evening, I will be covering with you a brief market overview of the beef and lamb market that we have currently in Wales. And this will be in terms of livestock numbers, prices, as well as a market update also. So in terms of the number of sheep that we have in Wales currently, so the Welsh flock represents around 27% of the total UK flock. This is around 8.7 million a head. In terms of current trends and how this looks compared to previous years, the total number of sheep and lambs in Wales is currently down 7% on the year. Moving on now briefly to look at the current trends in terms of the GB average dead weight for prime lambs produced. So as of the week ending the 27th of January, the average prime lamb dead weight price was 631.8 pence a kilo. And this is an increase on the year of around 24%. Last week, we saw prices improve by 24 pence on the week. Prices so far into 2024 have opened at their highest seen in the last 10-year period. And then if we focus on 2023 in general, which is the green line on the graph, 2023 started the year below year earlier levels and did slightly dip below the 5-year average. However, we did see a price improvement around Easter and into the summer months. The average price did have a slight decline into the autumn season, and this is a trend that we do see year on year as supply increases during this period. So then if we focus on the current UK production levels, and this data that you can see on screen now is from January to December 2023, so the most recent up-to-date figures that we have. We know that there were high adult sheep slaughterings at the first 6 months of 2023, but numbers then came in line with seasonal averages. If we focus on the prime lamb production, slaughterings last year were up by 0.2%. However, carcass weight averages did fall, and the average carcass weight was around 19.8 kilos. The reason behind the reduction in carcass weights, we did see farmers marketing their lambs earlier due to high on-farm feeding costs, but also due to grass availability as well. And the carcass weight reduction combined with the increase in prime lamb slaughterings equated to a total sheep meat production that fell by 2% on the year. We know as we go across the production year, we do see fluctuations in terms of the number of lambs or the throughput in terms of slaughterings that we have. For the first 6 months of last year, throughput was quite steady, but kill levels in July, August and September, which is traditionally where we see higher throughput levels, were down 4% on the year. And we know this was due to fewer lambs on the ground. According to the June 2023 survey results, there were 6% fewer lambs on the ground. And there were also reports of delayed finishing times as well, and impacted towards the wetter weather towards the end of 2023. Last year, we did see a high carryover of old season lambs. If you look at the graph there was a peak in slaughterings in January and February, and especially March. But we are unlikely to see the same carryover of old season lambs into the 2024 kill period. So where is our lamb product going? So of all the lamb that we produce in Wales, only around 5% of that is consumed within Wales. 60% is outside for the rest of the UK, and then 35% goes to our export market destinations. In 2022, which is our most recent figures that we currently do have, the value of sheep meat export for Wales was £173.6 million. So in terms of imports and exports for UK sheep meat globally, and this is for fresh and frozen product from January to November 2023. We are seeing positive growth within the sheep meat exports, and this is demonstrating a strong global demand for PGI Welsh lamb. Exports were up by 11%, and 94% of total exports went to the EU. And we also saw a reduction of imports on the year, down by 13%. In terms of GB retail performance, so this is the total volume of lamb sold at our supermarkets in the UK. So we do tend to see with lamb seasonal fluctuations in terms of when we have festivals or celebrations, lamb does do quite well. And that is where you can see there in the graph with a peak in April. But interestingly, we're also seeing an increase in lamb sales year on year for the month of December. And lamb did really well this year in the run up to Christmas, with supermarkets being their busiest seen since 2019. For the 12 weeks in the lead up to Christmas, so the 12 weeks to the 24th of December, total volume sold of lamb was up 15% on the year. Spend was up 13%, which was also helped by an average price increase of 2%. Gains were also made through people buying into the category. We saw a total of 23% of the GB population buying lamb at least once in the run up to Christmas. And performance for 23 as a whole. Spend was up 5%, volume up 3%, and average price up 1%. Overall, we also saw a positive increase in the number of consumers buying into the category, with almost 45% of the GB population buying lamb at least one point in 2023 at retail. But we also know there's an increase in consumers buying both in hospitality settings as well as with the butchers as well. So if we then look at the lamb carcass balance. So for the lamb carcass balance, we have seen a slight shift in trends. Leg roasting joints are becoming increasingly more popular. And in 2023, of all the sales of lamb at GB retail, 43% of which was a leg roasting joint. And this came at the expense of chops and steaks, which did reduce by 1% on the year as a result of that increase in popularity of leg roasting joints. So if we now move on to look at the beef sector in Wales. So the total Welsh herd represents around 12% of the UK total, and this is around 1.1 million a head. On the year, we did see a reduction in the total number of cattle and calves on the ground in Wales, and this was slightly reduced by 1%. So in terms of cattle producer prices, and this graph illustrates the prices that we've seen for England and Wales in terms of deadweight steer overall price. And as of the week ending the 27th of January, the average steer deadweight price was up on the year by 8% to 492.1 pence a kilo, which is a rise of 0.8 pence a kilo on the week. If we focus there on the green line of 2023, we saw beef prices bucking the trend in 2023. They lifted after the Christmas period, which is something that we don't traditionally see, and these prices continued to elevate until late May. And this was thanks to lower slaughtering and also a reduction in imports. Then the market went into reverse, and a weaker consumer demand saw a steady price slump over the summer period, before we did see a rebounding in the autumn as slaughter levels fell once again, and this improvement in price was also coupled with the back-to-school demand. Despite this price volatility, cattle prices continue to hold above year-earlier levels throughout 2023. Although it was a slightly different story when it comes to the cull cow average deadweight price for England and Wales. The cull cow market is also recovering following a period of trending below 3 pence a kilo. But glad to report that this is becoming stronger week on week, and increases in price have increased for 6 consecutive weeks now, and up almost 27 pence across January alone. The current average of 327 pence a kilo is, however, 20 pence below year earlier levels, but some 77 pence a kilo above the long-term average. And as we looked at the throughput figures for lamb, we have similar results here for beef, with a total beef production down 2% on the year. Overall, we did see decline in throughput in terms of steers and young bulls, but we did see an increase in the number of heifers coming onto the market. That green upward arrow there does look positive, but actually this does reflect trends in the industry. With more heifers coming onto the market in terms of finishing, this means there is a reduction of the number of heifers retained within our herds for breeding. What we did see last year as well was prime cattle throughput was strong during the first quarter of the year. However, levels then continued to decrease through quarter 2, 3 and 4, which resulted in the lower numbers last year. And kill in December was down by 14% on the year. Like we saw with lamb, carcass weights were much lighter on the year, and this was due to feed availability for finishing. So looking at the beef imports and exports for January to November in terms of fresh and frozen product. Beef exports are more stable when compared to the long-term average, even though exports did fall by 16% on the year. However, what we are seeing is an increase in demand from UK consumers for high-quality home-produced beef, with imports down by 3% on the year as well. And what we are seeing is these imports are down to current levels, to pre-COVID levels that we did see. So in terms of beef performance at retail, beef is quite steady in terms of the performance at retail, but if we do focus on that Christmas period, beef did do okay at Christmas. With the 12 weeks running up to Christmas, we did, however, see a slight reduction of 1.5% on the year. However, roast and joints proved quite popular in the 2 weeks before Christmas, with these sales up 11% on the year. Spend was up by 6% and average price was up by 7%. And this increase in average price may have deterred buyers from buying beef at this stage. But just remembering that we are comparing beef to the 2022 figures when beef did do really well at Christmas and had a really strong year. So looking at performance during 2023 as a whole, spend was up by 8%, volume was slightly reduced by 2%, and average price was up by 10%. Overall, the increase in average price may have limited performance, what we saw in consumer numbers within the category falling slightly, even though we did have quite a positive period towards Christmas. So if we then look at the beef carcass balance, which is quite a different story compared to lamb. So in total of the percentage of cuts sold at retail in GB, we see around 55% of those total cuts sold as mince. And this has increased over recent years. And this is mainly due to the pressures of the cost of living crisis, where we see consumers wanting a quick midweek meal and opt towards mince. So then if we move to look ahead, what we can see and what we can look at in terms of trends going forward for both lamb and beef. For lamb, we know that there is a smaller carryover of old season lambs this year. There was a large carryover of old season lambs at the start of 2023, but we're unlikely to see that again this year. The main reason for that is that the lamb crop last year was smaller anyway, so there's less lambs to carry over. And conditions haven't been as bad this year compared to last year in terms of weather conditions impacting finishing times, although there have been recent reports of delays in finishing times with the weather that we saw being wetter in November and December. There are fewer breeding ewes, which could lead to a reduction in lower production of lamb. So the June survey results showed that ewes in Wales, the total breeding flock, was down by 5%. And the UK breeding flock down by 2%. Inevitably, there will be fewer lambs on the ground this coming season as a result of that. And that is still predicted even if we do have strong scanning percentages, as the UK sheep flock is currently at its smallest it has been for the past 12 years. We did see that lamb had a really good Christmas, as I said, and this sets us up really well going into 2024. We hope we are quite confident that Easter should bring up demand, and also summer demand could have potential, but this again is very weather dependent. Also in terms of exports and how lamb is competing on the world market. So our lamb price is quite competitive in terms of the price against the EU market at the moment. EU production remains quite subdued, so exports should be strong. And in terms of the EU market as well, we are seeing a reduction in sheep meat production on the continent as well, which should help export trade. So if we move across now to have a look at beef. Beef in the UK, the supply forecast, the amount of beef coming onto the market this year is predicted to be quite similar to the levels that we saw in 2023. Demand is recovering from the cost of living crisis, but the portion of meat sales remains high. Is this a potential for long-term levels and long-term trends? It's something that we will keep an eye on in terms of how this will then impact the market. Irish supply is expected to tighten, as well as supply from the EU market as well. We are seeing a reduction in Irish supply into 2024, so this could suggest positive undertones for the UK market. BCMS cattle population data for October 23 shows fewer animals on the ground aged 0 to 12 months, around a 3% reduction in the year. So this will tighten the long-term supply as we go further down the line into 2025. But all of these factors can contribute positively to the market, but we must also be mindful to external factors that can also influence the price that we receive at farm gate level, as well as the demand for our product as well. So we know there's a continuation in elevated farm input costs. The cost of living crisis is easing. We are seeing this ease, but labour availability as well is causing issues, especially overseas. The Ukraine war and politics in the Red Sea is also likely to have an impact in the market, and this is something that we continue to keep an eye on. So that is all from myself. So if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat function, and I'll now hand back over to you, Kath. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was fascinating, and it's fascinating to see the huge amount of statistics you were sharing there, and how weather, geopolitical impacts, the push and pull of supply and demand mechanisms are all filtering into the data that you've been displaying and explaining so very well this evening. And thank you for the prompt reminder. I know we've had quite a few people join throughout that presentation, so we are having a Q&A with the whole panel at the end of the session. So the Q&A function is available if you wish to get your questions in early. I'm sure there's been a lot prompted by the data and statistics that Elizabeth has just shown. We're now going to move on from a market industry update into a session where we talk about what we do with your levy. How do we market and promote your brands on your behalf, both domestically at home and abroad? And to do that, I'm going to hand over shortly to Pip Gill, who is HCC's campaign executive. Pip works in the strategic marketing and connections team, and she's going to be discussing our market priorities, our current plans, and our campaigns both from 2023 and what we hope to deliver and achieve in 2024 and beyond. The team worked incredibly hard on developing integrated marketing campaigns, promotional and engagement strategic work on behalf of the red meat industry in Wales, on both the global scale and the domestic scale. It's all about identifying opportunities, new markets for our brands, and the work they do is absolutely incredible. So without further ado, Pip, I'm going to hand the reins to you.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen for everyone. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that. So welcome. So yes, tonight I'm going to be talking and showing you a lot of the marketing work that sort of we produce on your behalf behind the scenes. So to kick us off, so what are our visions and our priorities within HCC? So obviously we're looking to take your product and turn it into that premium product and position it as such to those consumers looking to purchase. We obviously look to develop the EU trade opportunities, so we're looking for those new markets and working out there with trade to look at new retail opportunities to get the product once over there into store branded. We also look to optimise the GB consumption, so looking to work to get those people maybe switching from just standard lamb into premium Welsh lamb, looking at those people to switch maybe from their weekly meal of chicken to maybe a roast lamb, or looking at maybe those really quick and easy dishes that we're able to produce through different recipe development. We seek to look at new consumers as well in established markets, so we seek to try and keep those people as well as gain the new consumers that we're looking at. So looking at the younger people who are looking for those sort of ethical consumers who are maybe looking for something that's got a real story behind it. And we're obviously looking to increase the percentage of exports which go outside of the EU. So we're looking to develop those markets that are opening up to us, working alongside DEFRA and pulling those markets across, working with the processors to ensure that we're there when those markets are open and we're able to offer our product to those consumers. So what's our strategy within our teams and our company? We look to shift the buyer's perception to Welsh red meat brands as a premium brand. So we're really trying to sell to people that Welsh lamb is that premium brand. We're looking to extract the value from the brand, not just the product. So really giving people that story of why this product is the product they should be purchasing. Also listening to those consumers, telling us the stories and what they're after, and being able to give that to them, put it on their plate as such, to provide that umbrella brand that will benefit the whole industry. So when we're talking to processors and retailers, really getting them to understand why putting the Welsh lamb and branding it as such will work for their benefit and will work for what the consumer's looking for. That ability to recall a product is one of the strongest drivers in making consumers buy, and as such, increasing awareness and recognition is one of our key smart objectives that we're always working to increase. We want to make sure that our brand is that brand that those consumers, within those few minutes of walking through the meat aisles, is the brand that they pick up and put into their shopping basket. The Welsh lamb, Welsh beef brands have also been registered trademarks and must be associated with the protected geographical indication logo and the GI logo that now is in state within the UK. So within the UK market, we're looking at consumer marketing and what the demand is for our product. We're therefore then taking that demand and creating the stories to make the brand the choice of the consumer. We're looking at campaigns that go across many different medias. We're looking at events and experiential marketing where we go out there to talk to the consumers and allow them to taste the product, see what it's all about and understand the story that we're telling. We look at digital communications. We're all very much aware of how many people are now on screens, purchasing product on screens. We're there to ensure that, again, we're a touch point where people can see us and are able to think, maybe I'll purchase that product, I'll give it a go. We work in advocacy and defence, so defending your story, allowing people to understand the true story behind the product, the true story behind the brand, turning it into a brand that is really trustworthy. We work in health and education. We're taking our story to those professionals who are talking to the younger populations, enabling people to understand that as well as sustainability and a trustworthy product, we're also a very beneficial health product that can enable people to keep a balanced diet. There's huge amounts of vitamins, minerals within our products. We're aware of them, but we're enabling those stories to come through and tell our consumers as well. Within the trade development areas in the UK market, we work alongside the retail sectors, food service sectors, and within public procurement. We're really creating those channels of conversation to pass on our knowledge to the retail sector and food service sectors, for them to pass on the same stories. So throughout the whole supply chain, our story is one and telling the consumer what they want to hear. I will now just show a brief video that will give you an idea of the work that goes on to celebrate the brands that you guys have created and that we're able to put out there and show the consumers what we have to offer. gives you a sample of all the work that's going on to show the brand for what it truly is and show the product that you supply to us in the greatest light. So this year's current campaign was all about you, the farmers. We were talking about uniquely Welsh, experts in their field. So really putting the farmers at the forefront of the campaign. This, we have so far, from feedback we've been receiving, has been received extremely well and has really told the story and pulled the consumers into what we're trying to put forward. I'll just, for those who may not have seen it, I'll just show you the advert that went out this year, that was out to around 1 million people. And we're still waiting for all our full figures to come through, but it was very targeted in the areas where we knew product was available, and we were able to get some fantastic engagement through our digital channels with it as well.
These are the lands. These are the eyes. These are the hands. The experts. The wise. This is the passion. This is the taste of Welsh lamb. Uniquely Welsh. Experts in their field.
So what was exciting also about this video is this year we were able to test this advert before it went out to the consumers themselves. So we were able to send it through a channel to basically test what the audience would see, where they would be looking on the screen, what they would be taking home from this, and all the results that we had back to ensure that we wanted to get our messaging across came through positively. We were therefore able, when building our digital and our strategies, to know where to be placing these adverts, to be able to gain that recognition and look for what the consumer wanted. An example of where this advert was placed is you will see here at Waterloo Station. So you will have seen through that just the amount of footfall of people walking through and who will have had that visually in their sights, which may give them that slight recognition to remember when they're in that meat aisle to go and find our products. So that was our current lamb campaign, of which we're waiting for results to come through, and hopefully we will see the recognition and the work that's gone into it come through positively.
These are the lands.
Sorry, it's frozen. So then we move on to our beef campaign. Again, taking the uniquely Welsh and experts in their field, we moved on to beef, but thought with beef, as our product, we're aware, is only sold branded in Wales, that we would bring something local, knowing that this product is truly, naturally and local for those to purchase. We again brought the farmers to the forefront of our advertising campaigns, utilising farmers we were aware have great credentials and also have that look and feel that we really want people to understand, to show how our product truly is natural and sustainable. We were able to work with S4C and get sponsorship working with them throughout the Christmas period, and we were able to get radio advertising onto global radio's channels to ensure that, again, we were fitting those touch points for people to hear and see what we were producing. So that was just an example of one of our small adverts that would have run alongside TV on S4C. We then also had the radio commercial, which was running on Smooth Radio throughout November, December and into the first week of January.
Come rain, or more rain, our farmers have been at it for centuries, creating something special, natural, flavoursome. A tasty traditional Welsh beef roast, a festive Welsh beef Wellington, or a melt-in-the-mouth Welsh beef steak. Whatever the occasion, it's quality on your doorstep. Naturally local, uniquely Welsh. From our experts in their field.
So that was our beef campaign, which has just recently completed, and we're now waiting for the results again of that to come through. So what else do we as a team work on? So we obviously work with our butchers. So we've created a butchers club that has got members across the UK who are approved stockists of Welsh lamb and Welsh beef. We create materials for them to gain understanding of why they would put that product into their stores, but also the understanding of what they can sell out to the consumer. We produce point of sale, which they're able to pass on, again, sending that message to the consumer of a through story from farm to fork. With this scheme, we aim to work with the butchers as well, understanding what their customers are looking for. We get information in regards to what recipes they might be looking for, whether it's a quick meal or whether it's that slow luxury Sunday roast or a special occasion meal. We also, as I mentioned previously, work with health and education professionals. We have specific websites that are full of information for your younger years within schools up until GCSE years, and working with those health professionals to give them the real information behind the product. We have seen great success with these platforms, and we've also been able to pass these on to the schools, so they're able to use real teachers' plans and lessons within their classrooms to really teach those people who in the future will be purchasing our products as well. So what do we do then in our export markets? Within Europe, we have France, Italy, Germany and Belgium. There are very established markets. We work with trade representatives and market representatives who are able to develop campaigns alongside us and continue our story moving forward into those markets abroad. We visit trade shows where we're able to take our product, sample the product so they're able to taste. And also we work with key account support, so we're able to then really support the retailers who are already stocking our product. We work with those key market representatives and key account supports to create press and PR. We have visits from those countries over to ours, so we're able to truly tell the story of what Welsh lamb and Welsh beef is. This is just a small video to show you again of some of the work that we do within export markets and what we're selling to those countries.
Morjens, mun nimi on Sami Hakamäki. Tänään kokataan lampaanlihaa. Meillä olisi tuossa ulkofile ja niin kuin kuvasta näkyy, niin kesä on tullut ja se olisi tarkoitus näkyä myös lautasella.
Salve a tutti, sono Fforwm Ffermwyr, sono uno chef italiano in Inghilterra con 3 ristoranti bellissimi e oggi parliamo della spalla di agnello gallese.
So what do we work with in developing markets, and where are we looking at to prioritise? So when we're looking at prioritising and looking at the new markets, we're obviously working alongside DEFRA to see what's coming up and what's opening. We analyse the market size to ensure we look at the potential growth that is available to us. What's the red meat consumption within those countries when we're looking to see what the developments could be? We're obviously looking to sell Welsh lamb as that premium brand within those food service opportunities and within the consumer opportunities. Looking at what competition is within those markets before we go in that could create an unfair advantage. Ease of doing business. So how easy will it be for us to work and get into those new markets? We're obviously working and looking at the GDP and the household incomes, and obviously working with the political issues that may be within countries, the economic growth and the currency stability. There's a lot when we're looking and identifying those new markets that we have to take into consideration before we just place the product within areas. We're also looking not only to work with these countries, but to understand that our brand can be taken global. So it isn't just Welsh lamb within the UK, it's a global brand and a global story we're therefore able to present to everybody. That's just a small sample then of all the work that's going on within the marketing department. And on that note, I'll just hand back to Kath. And as we've said, there's a Q&A session at the end, so please do feel free to add your questions into the column on the side.
Thank you, Pip. That was a huge amount packed into the last 20 minutes. And I always find it really exciting to see HCC's work on display visually, because it brings to life everything that HCC is doing on behalf of levy-paying stakeholders. So thank you, Pip. Moving on to the last presentation this evening, a very familiar face to many of you that are joined on the call, I know. We have Rachel Madeley-David, Head of Sustainability and Future Policy for Hydrigi Cymru. Rachel's department works to define, shape and lead HCC's sustainability strategy and the sustainability strategy for the whole industry and sector in Wales, engaging with stakeholders, partners, working tirelessly with Welsh Government officials and thought leaders to shape and inform future agricultural policy. Rachel's going to give us a sustainability update, and I'm going to hand the baton to you, Rachel. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Kath. Not so far. Good evening, everybody. Just bear with me 1 second while I just share my screen. There we go. I'm afraid I've got no lovely video. So we were saying before that Pip has got all those wonderful videos that just encapsulate actually sort of what we're doing and taking those products. So bear with me. Mine feels like the real boring feel like the poor relation tonight, but hopefully I've got something that will really sort of whet your appetite in terms of what we're going to talk about. And I think actually I've had quite a nice segue from Pip. She used the phrase sort of your story, and I like to think this is really part of our story as red meat producers in Wales. And actually our marketing team, they need all the evidence, a bit like sort of the stuff that Lizzie talked about before, is all that data that underpins this. And actually then the team that I work in, that's all about then the evidence that helps the marketeers, it underpins our brand. So hopefully you'll get a bit of an insight for that. I will move swiftly on. So this is what I'm going to cover. First of all, I like to, and apologies, I've noticed a few names that probably heard me talk about similar things before. So apologies if I'm telling you something you've already heard before. But I like, sort of HCC, we like to talk about what would be the total environmental footprint. So quite often we hear just about carbon, but actually the way we produce in Wales is so unique, it's so special, and actually we need to have a much more grown-up conversation and start to capturing actually what the total environmental impact is of our food systems. And actually we're in a really good place here in Wales if we start taking this more grown-up, more holistic view. So I'm going to talk about that. Despite sort of looking at this more holistic view, it's still really important that we focus on carbon. I know everybody's probably eye rolling or sort of sighing or carbon again, but actually it is important. So I want to just cover briefly actually why it does matter to us, why it matters to our customers. I'm also going to then sort of demonstrate actually how we can work together as a supply chain, especially on that carbon agenda, and how it can be a bit of a solution when we do work together. And then lastly, I'm going to briefly cover about some of the biodiversity work that we've done over the last sort of 12 months or so. So let me crack on. Yeah, so what do I mean when I talk about total environmental footprint? Now, you know, often the agenda does feel very focused on carbon, and it's absolutely important, and I'll go into that in a bit, but actually the way we produce sort of our food in Wales is fundamentally different. We can be set apart from our competitors if we take a much more holistic viewpoint. And what we want to try and do, so Pip's just talked about those brands, and we've got world-class, world-renowned brands in terms of PGI Welsh lamb, PGI Welsh beef, and also pork from Wales. And what we want to do is we build upon this a little provenance base, so people associate them with being from Wales. And what we want to do is build those brands to start identifying the sort of the total environmental footprint. The fact that we can be one of the most carbon efficient places on earth to produce red meat, the fact that our ruminants, that our livestock have a real positive impact on biodiversity on farms, the fact that the way we farm helps build and develop soil health, and we become managers of soil health, the fact that actually our farming systems can aid water quality, that we can not only, you know, sort of mitigate floods in terms of holding water back, but also have a really positive impact on water quality, and also that we can also have a positive impact on air quality as well. So it's how we start to evidence these, and that's the key thing here, that, you know, we all know, you know, and I'm a farmer too, we know that we're doing lots of this good stuff, but actually that's not enough. We need to start demonstrating and evidencing it, and that's where hopefully it starts to sort of all click into place now. We've heard, you know, Lizzie's sort of part of our sort of market intelligence team. It's very much a data hub, and how we start to really become data driven. And we need data for all these things, because it's not good enough that we just say it because we think it, because we feel it, because we do it every day. It's about demonstrating and having a really evidence driven sort of viewpoint on this. So that's what we need to do. Right, and this is why it's really important. So if we take the first one, carbon, for example, and please bear with me, I love this infographic. I appreciate it's very busy, and on what night is it? A Monday night at nearly 8 o'clock, it probably feels a bit heavy. And if anyone wants to contact me afterwards, please do drop me a line, or I can share this by all means. But this is why carbon's really important. We all know that we're amidst, you know, a climate and a nature crisis. They're intrinsically linked, and on the human level, it's massively important that we start to take this seriously and take some action. But this at the moment, why there's quite a lot of pressure in terms of the supply chain on carbon, and this is why it does matter to us as farmers, because it really matters to our supply chain. Now, what you might have heard already, the notion of scope 3 emissions. It's something that it's all become like a new lexicon, hasn't it? All of a sudden, we're all talking about carbon, we're talking about GWP 100, we're talking about scope 3 emissions. And this is where scope 3 emissions start to sort of come into play. So this, for example, the line across the bottom, this is a supply chain. So we've got in the middle a reporting company. So say for argument's sake, this is one of our large retailers. So you can choose whichever one you want in your head. So that is them. And this is where it becomes important for us as supply chain, because a lot of us will be somehow linked to a company of this size in some of the products we sell. Now, they have got increased sort of reporting sort of conditions and mechanisms. At the moment, in terms of this, it's sort of voluntary, but it's steadily becoming down the track, so it will become statutory for them, and they will start to have to report on their carbon emissions. So scope 1 emissions, you see that in the middle of that big green arrow upwards. So if you're that large retailer, scope 1 is like your direct emissions. So your company facilities, your vehicles, that might be your stores, that might be your trucks. You are in full control of those emissions. And because you've got full control, it means you can change them. So you can reduce them. So you can perhaps decarbonize your stores. You can perhaps change your trucks to hydrogen or electric. You've got full control, and they're actually quite easy to solve for that company. Then we move on to scope 2 emissions, and you'll just see them on the side of the screen there. Now, these are still, they're indirect emissions, but they've got a bit more control. So these relate to sort of purchased utilities, such as electricity, for example. Again, these are quite easy things for any company to sort of to reduce, because what they can do is they can use their power, and they can perhaps change over to a green energy tariff rather than a brown. So they're on renewable energy. So jobs are good, and they can have some sort of quite easy impact and reduction on that. Now, the big thing, and this is where you've probably heard scope 3 emissions before, and you'll see that actually it's both sides of the supply chain. So it's upstream and it's downstream. Now, this is where it gets a bit tricky, because basically for your average food and drink company, so whether that's food service, whether it's a McDonald's, whether it's a Tesco, for argument's sake, whoever it is, most of their scope 3 emissions, so their carbon emissions, will actually lie within their supply chain. And usually for your average food and drink company, this is anywhere between about 75 and about 92% of their total emissions. So this is where they really, really need to focus. And as you'll see, that in terms of this sort of the upstream activity, so that's where the product is sort of produced, and in our case that would be on farm, that's where there's an awful lot of sort of carbon risk or a lot of emissions associated. And obviously it's very difficult when these are completely indirect, so they've got quite long, complicated supply chains in many cases. It's very difficult for them to really have a direct and a quick influence in terms of decarbonising or reducing the emissions of that part of the supply chain. So, I mean, this is a bit of a whistle-top sort of tour of scope 3 emissions, but hopefully the idea is that you understand why there's so much focus on the supply chain, because there's a lot of emissions risk within sort of the food and drink sector, especially at farm level, and yet they really need to try and sort of crack that nut quite quickly in terms of reducing. So that is why it does feel a bit disproportionate sometimes, and why we hear it a lot. So what can we do though as farmers? Because that's really important to think, that sometimes we think that it's very important to our supply chain, we're going to need it for the future. It's also pretty good for our businesses. There's lots of correlation between sort of financial efficiency and carbon efficiency. But actually, what can we do now and today? Now, this is, I appreciate my PowerPoint skills are limited, and this isn't the most attractive slide, but hopefully it gives you an idea that this is a real key mantra. And I'm so sad this is actually pinned up in my office on a post-it note, because the things we should all do, and any company, not just a farm, whether you're making tennis balls or whether you're producing meat or dairy, whatever it may be, this should be a really important mantra in terms of your business when it looks at carbon. First of all, it's about measure. It's my favourite topic for those of you who have heard me before about carbon auditing, but actually, unless you measure, unless you know where you're at, you're just guessing. And actually, quite often it's a bit of a misinterpretation that there's a big assumption that we're already net zero if we're farming, but unfortunately, when you've got ruminants, you've got emissions, and actually sometimes it's a bit of a balancing act. So I'm a big advocate that we've got to start somewhere. Yes, the tools aren't perfect, but actually they'll give you a good indication. So I'm a big advocate that we start measure. And then when we start to measure, it should always give us a really good indication of where we can start to reduce. And as I've already mentioned, there's great correlation in between financial performance and efficiency and carbon efficiency, because carbon emissions generally mean wastage. You've got wastage in your system and you're not actually sort of balancing your inputs and outputs correctly. So there'll be some actual opportunities for saving money and therefore making more money. So that should always be the first thing. So it should always be measure, then reduce. Now, this is where, I should probably put brackets around this next thing. So this is insetting, and insetting, it's this whole sort of new language of the carbon world again. But this is where what you do then is you start to, if there's any sort of carbon deficiencies in the system, so there's a bit of a carbon negative, is where you can start to inset that in your business. So in your farming business, for example, say you've got a sheep enterprise, so you've got emissions because you've got some ruminants, but actually perhaps you've got a recovering peat bog. So you've done a restoration project on a peat bog, for example, and actually you start to sequester carbon. You can then use that credit, so that sequestration, to start insetting into your sheep enterprise. So that means it makes your whole farming system really sustainable, and it looks at your land in a real sort of holistic way, and that's really key. I appreciate not everyone can do that, hence why there should be brackets, but that's where we should always be looking, that we reduce, then we look to see how we can inset. Now, the last port of call should always be offset. And I know this is controversial, because we see a lot of big companies outside of agriculture that automatically go to the offset. They don't look at the reduce necessarily, but they look at the offset. And that's where we perhaps start to feel under threat. But actually, that's what we really need to understand. That offset, it is a last resort. We should also look to reduce. But if you think of this model, and also in line with this previous sort of challenge that we've looked at Scope C emissions, this is where if we work together as a supply chain, there are really good opportunities, because agriculture, other than sort of marine, we are the only industry that can sequester carbon, and we must never lose sight of that. We're special because we can do that. Not another industry can't do that, other than sort of certain marine industries. So we have that capability. So if we think there's a need there, and then we can demonstrate through measurement, actually that we have some surplus, so we can then create, perhaps, and we won't go into details of carbon credit schemes now, but in the future we can use it within our own supply chain. We make our whole supply chain support itself in a really nice sort of circular way. So I think it's demonstrate that this can all work together quite well. Right, let's go on to something a bit nicer now, because I appreciate sort of carbon is a bit heavy for a Monday night. Now, so you would have hopefully remembered on one of my first slides, we talked about this total environmental footprint. We talked about carbon, and actually we've literally just got back a new report. So we've done a full sort of what we call a life cycle analysis, or an LCA, on sort of Welsh lamb and Welsh beef, looking at the carbon footprint, and we'll be getting those details out later in a few months' time to everybody. So we've got that new carbon data. What we've also done, so part of our RMDP project last year, we did a sort of biodiversity sort of audit, or a section of audits through the Hill Ram scheme, to start to create a biodiversity baseline for PGI Welsh lamb and Welsh beef. Now, the beauty of biodiversity is also probably its challenge. It's really difficult to create a baseline, because actually it's so different. What is sort of what's on my farm is very different to my neighbour's farm, for example, in terms of biodiversity. But actually, that's what makes it amazing. So we were trying to sort of get as much data as possible. And actually, we surveyed, it was 4,000 hectares in the end, all surveyed by independent ecologists, so absolute specialists in their field. So we partnered up with Fforwm Ffermwyr to do that, and we're sort of very grateful for their professionalism and the work that they undertook for this project. But the idea is, these were some of the top performing genetically farms in the country. So real commercial farms, and that's really important. So, there were farms that were absolutely, top performers. And I think that's the key thing for us. And the big thing for me is what that sort of audit told us is that we are actually managing 12 different habitat types with multiple sort of subhabitats, which I think is amazing. And actually, what the key thing I think that the ecologists found, that and there was intrinsic links between ruminants and habitat management. And that is just fundamental, because that is what we need to be saying, isn't it? We know that as producers, but actually having that done independently. And these are the different sort of the 12 different habitats here. And like I said, there will be multiple micro habitats under these 12 headlines. It's really fundamental. And that's the sort of evidence we need to be driving forward, that we can demonstrate independently with data, that we can demonstrate that sort of ruminant agriculture in Wales has a positive impact environmentally. And we're really proud of this, because we think it shows us at our best. Right, so what next? It's always really important. So as I've said, we've just had this life cycle analysis, so a new updated carbon footprint for Welsh beef and Welsh lamback, which we need as producers, which our supply chain needs for their reporting commitments, and actually will give us a really evidence-based way forward in terms of where we need to go, what we need to do. We've also got that biodiversity baseline, and we'll be looking actually how we can build upon that going forward as well. So now, what next? We need to start to evidence the other three. So soil health, water quality and air quality. So HCC this year, we're looking at how we can start to create a sort of baseline for Welsh red meat in terms of our impact on soil health. So that is where we're at this year. We'll be working with other partners because it's important that, you know, no one wants to reinvent the wheel, and we're very lucky. There's already a lot of data out there in Wales and a lot of good work. So that's where we're heading next. Looking forward to how we start to capture the other environmental metrics in the future. Right. I love this, and I think this is what I always like to leave people with. Again, I think sometimes it's perhaps when we're feeling a little bit down and a bit battered, it's always really important that we really remember we've got really something quite special. And actually, and I joke quite a lot about our sort of climatic conditions, or I like to call our maritime climate, which means it rains a lot, which means we're really good at growing grass. And actually, it's fundamental to how our landscape is. And I think we mustn't lose sight that, you know, we are one of the most sustainable places on this planet to produce red meat. And I think if we can just expand the way that we can underpin that through evidence, through data, then, you know, we'll still be here in the future. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Rachel. That was fantastic, and it's always lovely to end a presentation on a positive note. But actually, I think all three presentations were jam-packed full of all the positive work that HCC is doing on behalf of levy payers. So thank you all. We now are going to reconvene as a panel with me proffering some questions. So this is your opportunity. We've prompted you a couple of times. So if you want to get a question in, please pop it in the chat using the chat function. For those of you that have joined later, and you're joining from a mobile device and you can't see the Q&A function, look for the three little dots, click there, and you should find the Q&A, and that should enable you to pose a question. As chair, I get chair's privileges, and I can see some questions already in the chat. The first one I'm going to pop to you, Pip, if that's okay. I can see David Jared makes a comment that a 1% increase in Welsh lamb into England would be a significant volume. He also goes on to say, which indicates he's been doing some significant travel via the train, that there is a massive new screen in Euston Station in London for advertising. What role do you think billboards can have in the future of HCC's marketing, and what are your plans in the general sphere of marketing domestically going forward, Pip?
So you are correct, there is a brand new massive screen up in Euston. And for us, it was very exciting to get like the advert up and played in places like Waterloo, just because we're so aware of the footfall that obviously goes through those stations. And it's something that I find it really exciting. I'm also very aware that some people may not understand how these sort of things are purchased. So to give you a little bit of a marketing insight into it, if you imagine a stock exchange, this kind of advertising on billboards and things like that works on a sort of stock exchange. So you're almost bidding for those places in those stations at certain times. So obviously what we've done to get into Waterloo, and if we were to look, say, at Euston Station, is we do a lot of sort of research behind the scenes into, one, where our product is being stocked, two, what sort of people are walking through those areas, three, whether those then areas are sort of what timings that you would look at. So for instance, when we did the Waterloo, we were really specifically looking at those sort of 5 to 8 o'clock when people are going home, thinking about what they want to eat. So again, we look at what days that we would look at putting those advertisings on. It is something into 2024 that we're really hoping we're going to be able to continue. We'll be utilising the TV advert again moving forward because of the positive that we've had. We always talk about in marketing ad fatigue, where people go, oh, well, I've seen that advert. But we within our team are fully aware that we're working to the customer, not to what we may be working on all the time and seeing all the time. It's something that we always have to remember, and to be a really strong organisation, we have to be market orientated. We have to understand that I myself work with this brand 24/7. I'm not a customer. I can't have a bias to say, yeah, definitely this is the marketing, this is definitely going to work. We have to listen to what the customer wants. We have to listen to what the customer is looking at. We look at the trends that are going on within people's digital worlds, within what they're looking at on TVs. What is amazing nowadays is how through all the digital touch points that are available to us, we are truly able to track what the customers are looking at, what they're searching for. including, for example, when we did our TV advert, that's seeded to specific Sky boxes in regards to what they're looking for, what they're even purchasing within their supermarket shopping, because Sky can now link out to Nectar Card. So the whole marketing mix is almost opening up to us to be able to get our platforms out there, to be able to get our marketing into those houses, and hopefully, as you say, get that increase into the UK to bring out more branded products and work with the retailers to ensure the customers are truly getting what they're looking for.
Thank you, Pip, for that really comprehensive answer. We've had a question come in that's going to come to you, Elizabeth, and it relates to new trade tariffs being a concern for imports of Australian lamb. Are we the main destination currently for Australian lamb, and where do Australia mainly export their product? And if you can answer that, and then I'm going to come to another question on measuring carbon then to you, Rachel, if that's okay. But Elizabeth, if you can give a flavour of what's currently happening in the Australian market.
Yeah, what's actually currently happening in the Australian market is quite an interesting one, actually. We know that these trade tariffs have come into place, and it is quite worrying for us as an industry. And there is that perception perhaps there could be an increase in Australian product coming onto our market. But in terms of where we sit, in terms of they're a customer for themselves, so if you look at the total exports coming out of Australia, their main destinations, the UK actually isn't one of their top destinations. Around 2% of their total product comes to the UK. And actually, they're looking a lot closer to them in terms of their market. So China is still a really strong market for Australia, and actually at the expense of New Zealand lamb as well. And also the Middle East continues to be one of their main trade destinations. So the UK in general is quite small in terms of their total sheep meat exports, in terms of volume on the world market. Australia has been quite competitive recently on the world market, which could be a concern going forward. They have had a reduction in the total in their farm gate prices, which has made them competitive on the world market. But luckily for us, we continue to be quite competitive at the EU market, so that as well present isn't actually impacting our exports.
Lovely, thank you, Elizabeth. And on the theme of exports from other countries, there's a question from Bryn in the chat, which perhaps I can come to you, Rachel, on. How can we make sure that the New Zealand and Australia are measuring carbon on the same terms and not using a favourable calculator? So carbon calculators, over to you, Rachel.
Now, Bryn, this is my specialist subject because I am that rock and roll. It's a really good question, actually. And not only do we have it probably from a sort of a global competitor viewpoint, but I mean, we even have it internally. You know, in a former life, I used to have arguments with farmers who wanted to use the calculators that made them look the best. And actually, we need to get beyond that. But I think it's a really valid point when and the Kiwis did publish some figures. I think it's actually back into 22 now. The years sort of fly by, don't they? And actually, they were. I'd argue that they probably weren't great. I mean, I think it's all about integrity. It's about standing up, because actually, globally, our industry, it is under threat from certain sort of aspects of society in terms of pressures on ruminant agriculture. And I think the more that we have integrity in our sort of data, in the calculators we use, the better. I do think perhaps there's an opportunity sometimes for us to use some dual reporting. So, you know, I know that the sort of in the Southern Hemisphere, they do like using both GWP 100 and GWP star. And I think, although really we shouldn't be at the moment because it goes against the IPCC's advice. But I think there are things like that we can do. So we can demonstrate that we've got integrity, but we can also perhaps demonstrate where we sit as a comparison. So I think that would be perhaps the way forward with that one.
Thank you, Rachel. Pip, if I can come to you with a question that's been posed. There's an awful lot of activity on social media by all organisations, HCC included. How do we actually measure the effectiveness of social media?
So we look at measuring our social media in different ways. in years gone by, it used to be about how many followers you've got and all the likes that basically you got. But we look now to measure our followers a lot on engagement, because we really want to ensure that the people we're engaging with are actually our customers. It's not just about they've liked the page because they wanted to win a competition and getting those followers numbers up as high as possible. It's really ensuring that the conversations that we're having are important, we're putting the story across correctly. So we really look at measuring our platform measurements, such as Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, through the engagement that we get on those channels. And then by doing that, we're able to then target specific audiences. So for example, when we're looking at doing advertising on social media, we're able to even break it down to the media that we seed out to those audiences then. So you can put a slightly different message across to an ethical audience, to that of a mum audience, for example. And then you're able to really seed in the different stories that we've got to tell through the versatility of the product, the sustainability of the product, or the health of the product to the actual customer that you want. And by doing that, then you can really ensure that the consumers we're talking to have a real engagement and are really looking to listen to the story we've got to tell. Otherwise, you can just end up with a whole platform full of hundreds of people, which people go, oh, that looks really good. You've got hundreds of thousands. But of those, none of them are actually even engaging with what you're looking for. It's just a page that disappears off their social. And as we're all fully aware now on social platforms, the more you engage with something, the more you're going to get seeded the information, which again is the more it becomes sort of a memorable something within the consumer's mind. So therefore, again, as I said previously, you know, that 2 or 3 minutes you're in the meat aisle, suddenly a recollection, the logo's there, it's bringing it all back to the touch points. So then people are able to purchase the product that they're looking for.
Fantastic, thank you, Pip. The next question moves on to look at livestock numbers going forward. I'm going to pitch this one to you, Rachel, if that's okay. Elizabeth, data and figures in the statistics that she shared in her presentation indicated how supply and demand and that push and pull is key, and that there's a tightening in supply at the moment. With concerns currently being shared in the public domain around impacts on livestock numbers, particularly in Wales, is HCC concerned about having enough livestock numbers and product to meet the demands of our supply chain and fulfill our brand ambitions?
Yeah, no, it's a really key question really for us. And I think, you know, our stance has actually remained pretty similar actually for a number of years on this, and probably feels a bit more pronounced at the moment. But as both Lizzie and myself have said already tonight, we're very data driven, and the key thing I think, you know, for our entire supply chain, because we represent both farmer and also processor levy payers, is about critical mass of livestock, and that's fundamental. And I think, you know, there's an appreciation obviously about sort of the livestock sector's contribution to the Welsh economy on the whole, you know, including sort of underpinning rural economies. And it's really critical for us, therefore, that there is sufficient throughput and sufficient livestock numbers going forward.
Thank you, Rachel. And Lizzie, I'm going to come to you with the next question. And it's focusing in around, you know, you mentioned in your stats that lamb did particularly well at Christmas. Is turkey still the most favourite meat at Christmas time, or are we seeing a change in trends in consumer patterns? And can lamb win the day in the battle?
So as I said, Christmas is actually really interesting, and that's a really interesting conversation, an interesting question to know. Since COVID, what we have seen is real changes in terms of consumers, their buying habits, but also as well their preference, eating out of home or cooking within home. There has been a real change, and no year has been the same. We are starting to see consumers revert back to levels that we did see pre-COVID, but turkey does still remain the staple of Christmas. Over 50% this Christmas still consumed turkey. We did see a slight shift between fresh and frozen. Some consumers still, in terms of the cost of living crisis, looking there for more of frozen products. But as you said, lamb is still really important. And we have seen an increase year on year, and well above trends that we've seen over the last 5 years and those pre-COVID levels. And it's not only at retail that lamb is performing particularly well. Lamb performed well this year in retail, mainly due to promotions that we saw, and we know that lamb performs well when on promotion. But we have also seen growth, especially this year, online again. Online was the quickest growing channel at Christmas for lamb, and in particular for red meat, seeing increases there. And the butchers did well this Christmas. Lamb didn't perform as well in the butcher's setting as it did at retail, but beef was actually quite positive in terms of the butchers as well. And we saw in terms of red meat a growth of around 6% there as well. So a positive story not only for lamb but red meat in general this Christmas.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We do love a positive story. Another question for you, Rachel, if I may, and it's in and around funding. HCC has utilised funding really well in the past for the good of the industry, the Red Meat Development Programme being an example of that, enhanced export funding. What are HCC's ambitions for the future, given a very different funding landscape, to try and augment its levy income for the benefit of levy payers?
Yeah, no, it's a really valid question. So yeah, obviously, everyone will be aware that our sort of funding with the RDP came to an end last year, which was a great sort of multi-year project. So at the moment we've got a strategic view, and it's very much the strategic vision by the board that we start to augment levy funds with external funding, and there's dedicated people within the team. So I've got colleagues, and this is their focus. And actually, we're doing sort of numerous sort of project bids. I'll be honest, nothing similar the same scale as we saw via sort of EU structural funds again, but it's very much about accessing some really quite exciting pots. It's about building relationships with core partners throughout the UK and in Wales, and I think it's actually quite exciting. So hopefully there'll be some news we can share sooner rather than later with levy payers. But please watch this space. It's something we are working really hard at in terms of how we make that levy go further, and how we really sort of start to sort of do some really good work on behalf of levy payers with extra funding.
Lovely, thank you, Rachel. I think it's blue sky thinking and looking at new opportunities, isn't it? There's a comment in the chat. I'm going to come back to you, Rachel, if I may, from David, looking at sort of the unfairness perhaps as it's perceived in the industry in reporting of scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions, and differences between airlines and agricultural industry. How more broadly do we advocate for our industry, given those challenges, and given that sometimes the playing field doesn't feel that level? How do we advocate, and how does HCC work to advocate for the sector to ensure that we are extolling all of the good things that you've been talking about in your presentation, and making the case for red meat as part of a healthy, balanced diet?
Yeah, no, it's a really valid point from David, and actually it's sort of like an accountancy quirk, I think, with airlines around airports as well, that it doesn't make it quite like for like. However, probably in terms of aviation, I always think we also need to probably focus on our own industry. Sometimes it's very easy to deflect, and although we probably feel a lot of the pressure, we must focus on our own. But I think in terms of what we do in terms of that sort of advocacy and defence is a bit like Pip sort of touched on it earlier. Now, part of our sort of strategic sort of communications is very much about advocacy and defence and reputational work. But the key thing, and it goes back to, and hopefully you can see everything sort of interlinks, it goes back with what I was saying, it's got to be evidence driven. We've got to get that evidence behind us to go out and say, look, we're sequestering X tons of carbon, on Welsh farms, for example. We're doing X. We're also producing X tons of nutritious, sustainable lamb that's got X, Y, and Z in it. So we've really got to start being data driven. And I think that's the way that we'll be really pushing that sort of advocacy and defence work going forward, with sort of real evidence, but also some of the positive stories rather than being on the defence. It's sometimes I know advocacy defence is a term, but sometimes it's almost about selling those positive stories, what we are doing, what we can do, and I think that's really key to us going forward.
Lovely, thank you, Rachel. I'm going to end with one last question because time has really flown by, but I'm going to pitch this question to Pip, if I may. We've seen some amazing marketing work and branding work in your slides. And ending on a success note, hopefully, how do you measure success in all of the campaign work that you're currently doing, to actually sort of demonstrate a return on investment of a specific campaign or a broader campaign? What are your success measures? How do your department work to measure success?
So obviously you're aware, HCC, it's even in the name of our company, Meet Promotion. So we're obviously looking for how we measure all the promotional work that we undertake. We look at two different ways of basically looking at our results. We're obviously tracking all of our media that's out there live. So seeing the impressions that are happening, the engagement rates that are ongoing, sort of eyes on the prize kind of thing of how many people are looking at all of our advertising at the time. I can give you a sneak sort of preview into some of the results that are coming out at the moment in terms of those. So in terms of our advertising this year, we managed to have 23 million impressions through our TV and digital work. And of that, we had 141,000 or slightly over 141,000 click-throughs to our websites and our digital channels. So that sort of gives you how we're measuring. Then we're also looking at, we work on our website terms of basis. We look at working to see how many people are then sticking on the website, what kind of content they're looking at. But our big overall objectives, we have smart objectives that we're working to. So looking at working with YouGov, we run two sort of evaluations, one in England and one in Wales, to look at our awareness of the logos, our perceptions, so what people are thinking of the product, what their thoughts are behind it, to see really what's driving them to purchase or not purchase. And then we also look at that, propensity to purchase. So the question of, if there was absolutely nothing standing in your way, would you buy Welsh lamb, British lamb, New Zealand lamb? And they're the measurements we're just waiting to get our full results through. But we run those surveys basically similar times every year, so then we have them year-on-year comparisons, and fingers crossed, we've got everything crossed that this year we'll be having some great results coming through. We're fully aware we've been out there in touch points we haven't been for a while, but we've got all the confidence that those results are going to come back positively.
That's wonderful, thank you, Pip, and a really nice positive note to finish on. And just personally, the lamb campaign's just been a really wonderful piece of work, and it's been really nice to see it out there in the industry, but also shared tonight for everybody. With that, I'm just going to bring the Q&A to a close, and in doing so, can I put a huge thank you out there to all of you online for joining us this evening, and also to Elizabeth, Pip and Rachel for their detailed, and really learned presentations, and for their candour in answering the questions. I do also need to add one extra thank you. Behind every successful event, whether it's online or in person, there's always a really, really busy person behind the scenes burrowing away, making sure everything works. And tonight that's been Sue-Ann Jones. So Sue-Ann, you're behind the scenes. Thank you ever so much for everything you've done to assist us all in putting this onto the industry. Even more importantly, that you joined us when there is so much going on in the industry at the moment. And I do just want to end by saying a huge thank you to you all for joining. There's an awful lot going on at the moment, and just to mention that Welsh Government have got Sustainable Farming Scheme engagement events out there. The next 3 take place on the 6th of February in Bridgend, the 9th of February in Builth Wells, and the 4th of February in Machynlleth. So please go along and attend those events. But without further ado, thank you all for joining us, and I bid you a lovely rest of your evening. Thank you.